What do the ColecoVision, the Intellivision, the Atari 2600, and Sega Genesis all have in common? Well, first of all, they are all video game consoles from companies that used to market game consoles but that now no longer make them. But the other thing that they have in common is the fact that you can now buy plug and play consoles based on emulation technology that feature a bunch of licensed games from the original developers. After likely seeing the success of these consoles, Nintendo is getting in on the retro plug-and-play console craze too, with their new console, the NES Classic Edition Mini, for the price of $60, which is slightly more than what some of the other plug-and-play consoles go for, and which is the same price as a new AAA game. You can get 30 built-in NES titles featuring a variety of the more popular titles in the system's library, and a controller that is compatible with the Wii's Classic controller and that can be used on a Wii or Wii U. Personally, I'm not real excited about this, and I think this is a bad thing for Nintendo's image, and let me explain why. Now, these plug-and-play consoles have been around for quite some time. Ever since the mid-2000s, these things have risen in popularity among poor parents who insist on something new and not an old PS1 or 2 from Goodwill, or among those who just didn't want to buy little Jimmy a PlayStation 2 because the guy on television said it was bad, and usually they're sold in both toy aisles in stores and in stores that usually don't sell video games except when they're in the clearance aisle, such as grocery stores and drugstores. If you go to like Kroger or Walgreens or CVS or Dollar General around the Christmas shopping season, you'll see a lot of them selling these plug-and-play TV games. And while much of these games were either terrible kids games or games that were essentially modern-day 16-bit licensing games, perhaps the kind of plug-and-play game that remained the most popular has been the retro Flashback console. These are gaming platforms that feature classic video games packaged in an easy-to-use plug-and-play TV game format with re-releases of old classic video games from back in the day on them, and in most cases, legally licensed. Some of them, such as the Commodore 64 joystick or the Radica Genesis, come in a game controller or joystick form factor, while others, such as the Flashback series of consoles, usually made by AtGames, and Nintendo's new NES Classic Edition, come in form factors that simulate that of the original console, but smaller. At one point, these systems were actually the original system on a chip, and you can actually hack some of them, such as the Commodore 64 joystick, the Atari Flashback 2, or the Radica Genesis to actually play original game media. Many of these systems, especially the ones that come in smaller form factors, come with controllers that simulate the original controllers, and in many cases, such as that with the Genesis and Atari consoles, they are actually compatible with the original systems. So if you have the original system and your controller breaks, you could use the ones from those, and vice versa. And oddly enough, I'm shocked that Nintendo didn't get into this market segment earlier. Not only have these remake consoles been selling somewhat reasonable numbers, but Nintendo also has heavy brand recognition. They've had their games bootlegged and thrown onto NES clones, or Famiclones as they're normally called, and their anti-piracy propaganda website at one point pictured these Famicom clones loaded with games as devices that infringed on their rights if they contained their games. They were also targeting websites and stores selling these clones and boasting about how they got people selling them shut down. However, thanks to legal action combined with the rise of retro gaming culture and expired patents, these plug-and-play games loaded with Nintendo's games have mostly become less common, at least in America, with legal clones designed to play original cartridges taking their place in the market. You can buy for as little as $20 on Amazon an NES clone with an NES cartridge slot and the ability to use NES controllers, and there are versions of these same clones with Famicom cartridge slots as well. For slightly more, you can buy a Retro Duo or Retron 2, clones that feature a built-in Super Nintendo as well, or clones such as the Gen X Dual Station or the GN Twin that feature a Genesis instead of the Super Nintendo, along with the NES clone as usual. And of course, there are clones such as the Retron 3 or FC3 Plus which feature a Genesis, Super Nintendo, and NES all in the same system. And the best part is, unlike those other systems preloaded with Nintendo games, Game stores can sell used games, and Nintendo has no reason to go after them because these systems feature off-the-shelf hardware, or actually usually one-chip clones of the NES hardware that feature no copyrighted code whatsoever. These have gotten popular as original systems have skyrocketed in price thanks to inflated prices by retro game stores and eBay sellers. Why shell out money for an original beat-up and yellow Nintendo that will likely have issues such as capacitor failure or cartridge slots going loose later on when you can get a clone that does the same exact thing and lets you play original cartridges for less? So on one hand, it seems kind of late that Nintendo would be waiting this long to milk nostalgia. After all, for years and years, there have been both hardware clones of original systems targeted towards retro gamers, and in big box and grocery stores, there have been clones of classic game consoles sold for value prices loaded with officially licensed games already. On the other hand, though, Nintendo has brand value that the other companies don't, except for maybe Sega and Atari. And even with the brand recognition of Sega and Atari, you can still get 2600 and even some harder to find 8-bit line games for next to nothing. Yet Nintendo games are inflated to the point where even GameCube games have skyrocketed in price. And don't get me started on the Super Nintendo or N64. I mean, you have these two game systems that are common, and yet their games are costing as much as Sega and Atari's as flops. And at the same time, I feel as if this diminishes Nintendo's brand value even more, especially since Nintendo is given almost mythical status among new retro gamers who have never even touched an Atari emulator on their Acer laptop. This is pegging Nintendo down to that of the brands that I mentioned that can now be found at a dollar store. It's almost as if Nintendo is getting desperate to milk their nostalgia to the point where they are releasing these in stores. While this might attract some people who have to own every single thing with the Nintendo logo on it, and while it might attract lots of kids, this won't be as big as, say, putting NES or Super Nintendo games on smartphones. Just look at how big Pokemon Go is now. And just a few months ago, I was making jokes about how Nintendo was going to be making a plug-and-play system for sale at Walgreens and Dollar General. And look at Nintendo now. They are milking their franchise's nostalgia value until it's run into the ground like Sonic the Hedgehog was. Because that's what Nintendo is doing with their franchises now. I mean, nobody cares about Pokemon Sun and Moon. They're only obsessed over that Pokemon Go game, which has the 151 already milked original Pokemon in it. And of course, the Nintendo NES Classic Edition doesn't look good either, since the console already has some design flaws and other problems off the bat. It's not confirmed if the NES Classic Edition will let you get more games for the system that are notably missing, such as other classic Namco arcade titles, Contra, Metal Gear, Castlevania 3, some of the other Mega Man titles besides just 2, Earthbound Beginnings, also known as Mother 1, and numerous others. It also doesn't have a cartridge slot and likely won't let you hack one, knowing other recent emulator-based plug-and-play consoles. And it does not use an NES game controller port, meaning that you can't use those NES Advantage controllers without an adapter for the Wii. And honestly, if you're looking to explore the NES library and you already own a Wii or Wii U, just buy the NES controller separately, go to the Virtual Console, and buy some games there. That way you'll save $60 on a plastic hunk of crap. Or if you already own the cartridges, just get a cheap clone console from Amazon, because they're only $20. That's all that needs to be said. Thanks for watching, and subscribe for more.